everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 10 tips for avoiding heart disease. I would like to start off by introducing our founder and CEO of Belmont Village, Patricia Will. Patricia is a leading innovator in her field. As it celebrates 25 years, Belmont Village currently operates 31 best-in-class communities in 8 states and Mexico City. The company was among the first in the nation to fully vaccinate its resident population as well as its workforce. Mrs. Will was recently inducted into the Texas Business Hall of Fame and into the Senior Housing Hall of Fame.
Thanks, Jackie. It's a privilege to be here today. Happy Valentine's, everyone. Today is Valentine's Day, so it seems especially appropriate to speak on matters of the heart. But rather than offering a recipe for romance, today we're going to focus on how to take care of the heart, which is perhaps the most vital organ in the body. The intent here is not to detract from one day's indulgence in champagne and chocolates, but rather to look past today's sugar overload. And for that, we're fortunate to have with us an internationally recognized expert on how to keep our hearts healthy year-round. Thanks to our unique collaboration with Baptist Health South Florida, I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Jonathan Fialco. Dr. Fialco is Baptist's Chief of Cardiology and is Deputy Director of the Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute at Baptist. The Institute is the most comprehensive cardiovascular facility in South Florida and is a leader in the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of complex cardiovascular disease research. At Baptist, Dr. Fialco has been a principal investigator of many landmark studies, including many on preventive cardiology. As important, his patients love him, consistently giving him a 5 out of 5 rating. So it's indeed a great pleasure on this special day of the heart and in honor of Heart Healthy Month to welcome Dr. Jonathan Fialco.
Thank you very much, Patricia and team, for providing an opportunity for me to speak with your viewers. It's a very welcoming introduction. And again, as Valentine's Day, this is a particular appropriate conversation. And I have our Go Red for women and our Heart Month background, which I appreciate. You can take the glare of the red. I have a presentation put together here, which I will start sharing, and you can let me know, make sure I'm doing it correctly. And let me just put it on presentation mode. Are we good there with the presentation? Okay, great. And hope to spend maybe 20, 30 minutes giving you guys some information, some concepts. Start with little introductory comments. That's not overly scientific. I won't be boring you with a lot of graphs and journal slides and whatnot, but maybe some take-home thoughts, maybe putting together some things that you hear and see, but aren't really exactly sure how they align when it comes to heart disease and other areas of prevention, and hopefully provoke some questions, which we'll spend some time to your liking at the end of the presentation. So I say 10 tools, 10 tips to prevent heart disease, 5 big ones, a couple of smaller ones. You'll see how they're integrated. But again, in the interest of provoking conversation. Heart disease remains the #1 cause of death in the United States. Cardiovascular disease, which includes strokes, kills more men and women than all other causes of death, more than all cancers combined, and it remains the #1 killer like we described. Interestingly, happening a little bit in younger people than previous as well. I'll share with you this graph, and again, I promise you not too many of these, but I think it's worthwhile. We're looking at purple men and greener women. And over a period of 20, 30 years, we've actually decreased our cardiovascular deaths as a percent of our population. And why would this be the case? Well, maybe some public health strategies, maybe prevention strategies, maybe decreased smoking, which we'll mention shortly, maybe new medications like statins and the use of baby aspirin where appropriate. But in about 2010, 2011, we plateaued a little bit, and now we're on the increase again. And there's many thoughts for why we are now increasing our cardiovascular deaths, some of which we'll talk about. Maybe it's because we've not had a blockbuster therapy like statins or some of the new blood pressure medications or antiplatelet agents which can prevent blood clots. Maybe it's because we're an older population, maybe because we're more obese, but we know that heart disease is not going anywhere, unfortunately. And as you can see from the graphs, we're on an uptick in men and women's heart disease after significant inroads over decades in decreasing rates of heart disease. What is heart disease? We use the term quite a bit, and certainly when we deal with cardiovascular disease or issues that can affect the heart like rhythms or muscles or valves, they're all heart disease, but we're really talking about coronary artery disease. We're talking about a situation where the heart muscle can't get enough blood. Why does it want blood? Blood has nutrients, blood has oxygen. There are things we need in blood that provide cellular life, and the heart can't get it. And the reason it can't get it is for something called atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis literally means artery, athero, sclerosis, hardening. So it's literally a hardening of the arteries. It's a little bit of an older concept, which maybe we'll get to, but something inflames the walls of the arteries in our body, in particular our heart muscle. And eventually, if those walls close up and there's a blockage, part of the heart muscle dies, that's a heart attack. So we're going to be talking about heart disease in the vernacular of coronary artery disease or atherosclerosis. And this is what it looks like, folks. So if you can see this light yellow outer rim, that's a normal artery. And all this junk on the inside is kind of the atherosclerotic plaque. The black hole in the middle, that's the lumen. That's where the blood flows. The lighter yellow surrounding area is really plaque and disease. So you can see how the artery could become really narrowed in the blood flow. But look at that mushy stuff on the inside. It's not all calcium. It's not all hard. It's mushy, soft. Think of a pimple in your body where you have this soft, mushy inflammation. Think of that in the artery wall, and that's atherosclerosis. Now, why it's relevant, and again, I promise you my last scientific slide, is people think I've got disease in my arteries, it's going to block off. And the reality is 3 different things can happen when you've got atherosclerosis. One, quite frankly, is nothing. You die at a ripe old age of something else. It never acts up. Maybe you didn't even know you had it. You die and they find out you had some partial blockages, some disease in your arteries. And we obviously want that course. The second one is the artery can slowly narrow. This inflammatory process in the arteries narrows till eventually you get a partial blockage. And when you exercise, you get some discomfort in your chest because the heart muscle is not getting blood. Think of a muscle cramp when you're exercising, and you go to your doctor, you go to the hospital, and you find a blockage and you work it up. And that would be the bottom right, the stable angina, a stable narrowed artery. But the one we want to avoid the most is the bottom pink box, the myocardial infarction. This is where this inflammatory substance rips, and this lining in the artery blocks and causes a blood clot, and part of the heart muscle dies. So you can have disease in your arteries and never know it. You can have disease that will slowly narrow and lead to some symptoms of shortness of breath and chest pain, giving your doctors ample time to remedy that before you wind up with a heart attack. Or the artery can rip and cause a heart attack in the brain, a stroke, and obviously that's what we want to prevent. So let's start going through some tips about how to avoid having that ripped artery and even that slowly narrowed artery. And preferably, if you have atherosclerosis, stable, never know you have it, or avoiding it in the first place. The first one, don't smoke. I don't know the age of the viewers here, but smoking is the #1 driver of cardiovascular disease. Nicotine is an agent in tobacco, which actually makes it addicting, constricts your blood vessels, makes the arteries inflamed to allow that inflammatory process. Smoking is bad. If you don't smoke, don't start. If you do smoke, try to find a way to quit. It is an addictive. It is addiction. I never judge people who smoke. I judge them when they say, I don't care if I smoke, it doesn't bother me. But for those that want to quit, we will help them. Interestingly, the population in the United States, because we've done good jobs over the last couple of decades, maybe evidenced by those numbers of decreasing events, we do have lower smoking rates than a lot of Western civilizations. Having said that, the population that has the highest rates of new smoking is actually college age women. And there's some thoughts whether it's to keep their weight down or it's a social thing, but we do have subpopulations where smoking still is fairly prevalent. The other issue which I'll bring up is vaping, which is a relatively new phenomenon. So when you are burning tobacco leaves, that's a combustible smoke inhalation. Think of a cigarette, you're burning it, you're inhaling the smoke, you're inhaling the nicotine, which gets absorbed and goes right to the brain. Nicotine is the addictive substance. It gets absorbed through your cheeks and goes right to your brain where it gives pleasure. So if you smoke cigars and you say, well, I don't inhale, nicotine's coming right through your cheeks. Smokeless tobacco, nicotine right through your cheeks. So the inhalation's bad for your lungs and your tongue from cancer risks, from lung disease risks, but the nicotine, which affects the cardiovascular system, right through your cheeks when you inhale. So you have combustible products. Now, vaping, interestingly, has a positive benefit for people who smoke and want to quit smoking. Vaping may be a transition to get them away because they can decrease the amount of vaping or decrease the nicotine. But the vaping components that have nicotine, you're burning the chemicals and creating the smoke, as opposed you're heating the chemicals and producing a smoke as opposed to burning. But the nicotine is just as addicting. So don't let people who vape think that they don't have cardiovascular risk, especially if they're vaping nicotine products. Next, we will talk about, diet. Now, we could spend hours, days, weeks discussing proper diet. One of my areas of particular interest is proper nutrition and what it does to our body physiologically. I will tell you, you could probably each of you list 5 things you think about what's a healthy diet, and probably 4.5 of them will be wrong. There's so many misinformation, assumptions made over the last 30, 40 years. The food industry is involved, medical organizations involved. The reality is there probably is no one diet for everyone. Everyone's bodies are different. How we absorb foods are different. Where we are on our weight gain cascade makes a difference. But the reality is it seems to be the biggest changes in our diet from the negative is the processing and refinement of foods. So what I tell people is if you really just want a basic rule of thumb to how to eat a diet that provides nutrition, energy without disease, it's eat foods in the most natural form. Think about this. For tens of thousands of years, mankind has been eating natural foods, right? We were eating some fruit off the tree for a couple of weeks a year. We were hunting animals. We were fishing, in the waters. We might eat some healthy fibrous legumes and various other plants and vegetables. We weren't baking Pop-Tarts. We weren't, baking cakes. This is all relatively new in our health lifestyle. Think of it this way. 100 years ago, how many of your parents were able to open a refrigerator and there's 1,000 calories sitting for them? We had to work for our food, whether it be farm or work and then go to the markets for food. So food in its most natural form is probably the recommendation. There's an orange tree. Grab an orange, peel it. You have juice, which has some energy. You have vitamins. You have the pulp and fiber. That's natural. There's no orange juice tree. Squeeze 6 oranges, get the sugar, drink it, no fiber. That's not natural. So processed and refining the foods seems to be what our bodies are reacting to. We've never seen them before. We don't know what to do with it, which leads to inflammation. So again, lots of different aspects to food. Again, in the interest of questions, we might be able to take some. But as a general rule, shop outside the aisles in your supermarkets. Don't go down the aisles, and eat food in its most natural forms. Yes, a variety of fruits and copious vegetables, depending where you are. Carbohydrates themselves are not dangerous. The natural carbohydrates with lots of fiber are fine. The refined processed carbohydrates are bad. Omega-3 fatty acids are kind of oils and fats, which we need. Human beings must consume omega-3s and omega-6s. Omega-3s tend to be anti-inflammatory. And then again, avoid sugar. And I will, if there's one slide to leave you with, this is the slide. Sugar in its multiple forms. Table sugar is called sucrose. It's a molecule of fructose and glucose together. That's table sugar. But sugar is our enemy. There is no need for sugar in our body. If you eat a sugar-free diet, you are perfectly healthy. The body manufactures all the other elements it needs. Glucose is essential for our body function. Our liver manufactures glucose. If people say to you, well, you need sugar, your body needs sugar, absolutely. Our body will manufacture all the sugar it needs for its function. We don't need dietary sugar. Sugar triggers insulin. Insulin is a hormone that says, I got sugar coming in. I don't want it in my blood. Let me get out of it. Where does it put it? In your belly as fat, in your liver. It causes the inflammation. So sugar is seeming to drive a lot of our unhealthy lifestyle and a lot of our chronic disease. So if you're looking at what should I eat, let's start with what you shouldn't eat, and don't eat sugar, certainly in the form of table sugar. Fruits have sugar. If you're trying to lose weight, maybe not the best thing, but the sugar in fruits is generally tied up with a lot of fiber, so you don't absorb it quickly. But don't get fooled. Agave is sugar. Honey is sugar. Honey is the only food on the planet Earth that doesn't spoil. And the reason it doesn't spoil is its sugar concentration is so high, there's no water in honey, which is where bacteria grow. So think about that. Think about how sugar doesn't spoil because honey has so much sugar. So think of that in those terms. Now, here's a graph. Again, I know I promised there would be a lot of graphs, but it's kind of relevant, and it's going to lead towards the next component of what I want to bring to. So what you're looking here is the percent of our population with type 2 diabetes over years, going back to the left towards 1990. Now, the reason, and this only goes up even further, this is the 2005, it's skyrocketed since then. Now, why is this relevant? Because if you think, well, diabetes is prevalent in our lifestyle, it is probably 70 million Americans who are diabetic, probably another 40 million on their way, if not more. The reality is, look at 1990, which was only about 5% of our population is diabetic. Now it's about 20%. We were a healthier population. 30 years ago, we weren't diabetic. I'll show you in a second. We weren't obese. So something's changed. There's something different about our society and our lifestyle that's providing for this epidemic of diabetes and obesity. So just to say, well, that's human nature and that's whatever. Well, it wasn't that way years ago. So keep our mind open to what may have changed. So if we're talking about obesity and it's a reaction to diabetes, it's maintain a body weight. Now we talked about sugar and diet, but really this maintained body weight is really important. If you're starting to gain weight, especially in the belly, that's usually a sugar phenomenon. If you want to lose weight, I can't tell you how many people, especially in COVID, people are fairly active. They have a certain diet, whatever that looks like. Their weight is stable. They stop exercising and they gain weight. And then they'll come to me, 12, 15-pound weight gain over a period of time. So I just got to get back to exercise. And the reality is, and we'll get to exercise, you can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. You had a certain metabolic function. You were holding on to a certain amount of energy at a certain weight. The metabolic function got disrupted by lack of exercise, by eating differently. You can't just resume that function the way you were. You've got to reset your body. You've got to reset your metabolism. So going back, if you are at a good weight and you want to stay that way, certain lifestyle. Starting to gain a little weight, different lifestyle. Overweight and you want to lose weight, different lifestyle. Look at those specifics for what the recommendation with you. Don't listen to your neighbor who did something but might not have the same metabolism. But let's keep our weight down. Now, why is this relevant? Look at this slide. It's color-coded, and it shows 1990 top left, 1999 top right, 2009, of course, only worse since then. And it's the percent of our population who are obese. Obesity is defined as a BMI over 30, about 20, 30 pounds overweight for a 5'4" person. So going back to 1990, and if you look at the bottom right where the orange box is 25% of our population with obesity, no state in the union had a 25% obesity rate. And then you look at 2009, and only one state had a below 20% obesity rate. And of course, if I were to show you more current numbers, it'd be even higher. Most of our states, the obesity rates are 25 to 30%. So we have become a more obese population. We have a higher percentage of our people, men, women, children, who are now in the obese category, and it wasn't that way. Remember, it's not just a natural part of society. Something's changed. It wasn't that way. So how will we individually, as a community, as a country, get back healthy lifestyles? Again, major issues in how we define what those options are. So I show this again out of interest. This is Colosso. This guy in the 1902 Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus was the world's fattest man. So this gentleman was someone that people paid money to see, the funny fat man, because no one could even think that someone could be so heavy. And here was his competitor, a few years later. Here's the world's fattest woman in the turn of the century, 1900s. And now I'll share some pictures I took from Disney World, which when I went with my kids, my family a little while ago. And when we see this, we don't think twice about it anymore. But think about just 120 years ago, how no one saw people at this weight and didn't think it was something that belonged in a sideshow at a circus. So how we've just changed our sense of what's normal. And of course, the real crime, and then again, what's genetics? How do you have genetically similar twins that are over 700 pounds within 5 pounds of each other? There are clearly genetic components on top of it. We look at the metabolic components of fat. Here's an MRI scan. All the yellow is, the white yellow is storage of fat in a person's body. And the problem, if you look in the belly, is all that yellow in the viscera, in the abdomen. That becomes very dangerous. That leads to metabolic disturbances like heart disease. So again, we know obesity is a major metabolic disturbance. Fatty liver disease from sugar, storage of energy, insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, sugar. Gout starts with sugar. Alzheimer's now, we're talking about type 3 diabetes, which might be Alzheimer's, which might be from sugar. So again, a lot of confluence of how sugar in our diet is really affecting our metabolism. But of course, this is the real crime. And this is what our current state of a country is. This is where we're heading. The adolescent obesity rates are skyrocketing. and we're seeing diabetes in younger and younger children. And again, I leave it to you to figure out why and what we can do about it. So going back to the tools, there's different ways we hold on to weight, genetically and metabolically. You may have heard of the apple and the pear. So the people that hold on to their weight in their belly, think of an apple shape, but have narrow hips, narrow butt, narrow legs, those tend to be the more metabolically abnormal. The people who hold on to their weight in the subcutaneous flat, more the pear-shaped, tend to be a little less metabolically sound. I will tell you, we're seeing in a population as well, a term we're using calling metabolic obesity. More and more non-obese people are starting to show the signs of a pre-diabetic atherosclerotic heart disease risk, which is kind of scary. But we look at the waist circumference. So when you look at your waist, generally a man with a waist over 35 inches, a woman over 30 inches would be considered to be at metabolic risk. You weigh it at the belly button level. Don't weigh it at your hips. Don't have the belly hanging over the measurement tape if you wish. So again, we want to measure at the belly button level. And that's the way you can start telling if someone is gaining weight and it's a metabolically unsound weight gain. Stress. Again, we have simple bon mots like exercise, which is a great stress release, garden, listen to music, take your dog out for a walk, and you know what? They work. We can't necessarily eliminate stress in our life. And there's lots of definitions of stress, by the way. One is intensity without control. I have an intense job. I have a lot of responsibilities. I have a lot of people under me. I like recruiting doctors. I'm building new programs. Is it stress? Kind of, but I like it. It's intense. Stress is when you can't control what's that intensity. You can't control where the money's coming from. You can't control your kid's bad marriage. You can't control a medical condition. But stress is around us. So how do we deal with it? Recognize it. Take a few extra minutes. From the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep, probably your day is full. And, hopefully you'll have a little bit of time to sit and put the TV on and just zone out or listen to some music, but be conscious of it. Reduce the stress in your life. Avoid stressful situations, but mitigate it. But you have to be conscious of it. You have to say, what do I want to do to decrease stress? I'm feeling that tension. Stress raises cortisol. It raises adrenaline. It raises hormones, which can lead to vascular disease. Stress can make you hungry, so we do a lot of cravings when we're stressed. So again, in the interest of time, we can spend a lot of time with these components, but stop and say, where are my stresses? How can I decrease them? Can't get rid of them. What can I do to make myself less stressed? Get up 5 minutes early in the morning, do 10 jumping jacks, do 5 sit-ups, get up 10 minutes earlier and sit and just count to 10 breaths. Sometimes it really does work. Physiologically, blood pressure comes down, heart rate comes down, even helps with sugar and various other components. Sleep. Sleep is something that I became very much attuned to about 15 years ago as I started really developing out cardiovascular prevention. We used to think of sleep as the absence of wake, right? I'm awake, I'm thinking, now I'm not awake, I'm asleep, but it's not. Sleep is an active physiological process. There are things going on in our mind and in our body and the cells of our brain to clear out toxins when we're sleeping. And if we think about this, going back to the conversation about evolution, tens of thousands of years, mankind eating natural foods, we used to go to sleep when the sun went down and we woke up when the sun came up. The sun starts setting, that's twilight. That starts stimulating melatonin, the natural hormone in our body, prepares our mind for sleep, and the sun comes up and we wake up. Well, what do we do now? We stay up late watching TV. We've got these bright screens in front of our face we keep checking out. We want to extend our day, and we don't get enough sleep. And when we do sleep, it might not be a good quality sleep. So you might be snoring, you might have sleep apnea, the dog might be barking, you're turning the TV off. So finding healthy sleep habits is really important. Try to go to sleep at the same time every night. Dim your lights 45 minutes to an hour before bedtime. So you're starting to train your mind to get sleepy. Use your bed for sex and sleep. Don't read in bed. Don't watch TV in bed. Train your mind that I'm here, I'm going to sleep. That's what it's for. And lots of other tips. Keep your room cool. And it really has been shown to have physiological benefit. People who sleep poorly, who are then trained to sleep better, whether it's with medical devices or just training, blood pressure goes down, adrenaline goes down, sugar goes down. So sleep is really an important part of how we will prevent cardiovascular disease. Exercise, I mentioned. So exercise really has profound benefits. Just as nicotine and smoking affects every organ and every cell in our body negatively, exercise has positive function on every aspect of our body. Physiological things helps us decrease storage of fat, makes us less hungry when done correctly, decreases blood pressure, improves insulin sensitivity so the sugar doesn't become as dangerous. Your body metabolizes it better, makes us sleep better, decreases depression. How do you exercise? Anything is good. When we're sitting, your spine is supporting your body weight. Stand up, and now you're using your flank muscles to support your body weight. Standing is exercise. Taking a walk is exercise. You don't need a gym. You don't need a membership. Gyms make money, folks, on people signing up and never using them. If everyone who belonged to a gym showed up at the same time, they go out of business. Use your resources. Jumping jacks at home. Walk around your living room a few times. 3-minute walk this way, 3-minute back. It's exercise. Exercise accumulates. You exercise 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon, 20 minutes of exercise. The medical organizations say try to do 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week, 150 minutes. Does that mean if you do 151 minutes, you're great, 149 minutes, you failed? Of course not. These are just guidelines, they're goals, but do something. Aerobic exercise, resistance training helps, stretching, it's all exercise. You're using your muscles in your body, you're helping your metabolism. All the benefits that you may be suffering from are achieved from exercise. We know that exercise decreases risk of cancer, heart disease, chronic illnesses, actually strengthens your muscles to avoid exercise disease. Number one reason people go to an emergency room in the United States, back pain. And most of it's from weak muscles because you don't exercise, the spine gets compressed, hurts. What do you do when you have back pain? Physical therapy. Strengthen the back muscles so it takes strain off your spine and hips and the pain goes away. So exercise actually helps orthopedic protection. I'll throw a couple of others out here in the interest of time. Again, each of these 10 things could be its own lecture, but we'll talk about a couple of tips. Lipids, lipoproteins, triglycerides. As a lipid specialist, I run our lipid management program. As a preventive cardiologist, I never use the term lower your cholesterol. That's such a false statement. Cholesterol is a natural substance made by our bodies. Everyone has cholesterol. It's needed for hormone production, part of cell membranes. If you eat a cholesterol-free diet, you're perfectly healthy. The body manufactures all the cholesterol it needs. Why do people have different levels of cholesterol? Well, your body's manufacturing cholesterol, it's using it. Excess is meant to be removed through the liver into our bile, into our stool. Not to be too vulgar, but we literally crap out the extra cholesterol our body makes. What determines people's cholesterol levels is how well they clear it through their liver, not how much they eat. The amount in your diet is minuscule compared to what your body makes. Eat all the cholesterol you want, it's irrelevant. It's not how much you make. The body's making what it needs. People who very efficiently clear cholesterol through their liver, genetically, dietary factors, exercise, have low cholesterol level. People who don't clear it well have high cholesterol level. Cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, but if you've got inflamed arteries because of nicotine, because of processed and refined foods, because of blood pressure, then the cholesterol in the blood, which does not belong in the arteries, gets into the arteries, leads to that inflammatory process, going to that blood vessel we talked about. So cholesterol is a way we look at one's risk. Someone who has vascular disease, we manage to keep the cholesterol out of the arteries by helping the body remove it through the liver. That's what statins do. They take the cholesterol your body's making and get it out through the liver instead of going into the arteries. But your cholesterol level by itself does not define if you have vascular disease. If you have vascular disease, your cholesterol level becomes a target. Triglycerides. Triglycerides are food. We are living organisms. We require nutrition. We eat food and we digest it, absorb it, and deliver it to the cells in our body. Everyone remember your old high school chemistry? The Krebs cycle? Fatty acids come into our Krebs cycle and the breakage of the carbon bonds releases ATP. I mean, I don't want to blow you away by a Zoom, but the bottom line is food becomes energy. Triglycerides is food. It's a glyceride, which is a 3-carbon sugar, and a fatty acid attached. Those are foods. What drives triglycerides is the sugar. Without the glyceride, you don't make triglycerides. Elevated triglycerides is someone who's taking in more energy, specifically more carbohydrates. Body can't handle it. It's a sign of a risk for heart disease. It's a precursor to diabetes. So look at your triglycerides, look at your cholesterol levels, and then you can determine what do I need to do dietarily to improve my cardiovascular risk. Healthful blood pressure. I mean, if you think about lipids, lipoproteins, triglycerides, blood pressure, you don't get up in the morning and say, I feel bad. My cholesterol must be high today. These are things you need to check. So follow your blood pressure. A higher blood pressure is more tension in the arteries, generally precipitated by refined foods, generally precipitated by a lot of sugars and starches, believe it or not. A few point weight gain, a few point weight loss can normalize a blood pressure. 4 pounds can make someone's blood pressure normal, but blood pressure is another component to manage to avoid heart disease. We talked about blood sugar. We talked about sugar in the diet. But obviously, when we eat sugar, the body works hard to metabolize it and keep it out of the blood. When it starts elevating in your blood, that means your body's losing the battle. The battle to take your dietary sugar out of your blood and put it somewhere else, you're losing. Your blood sugar is going up. When it goes up higher because you're losing the battle, that's diabetes. Diabetics die of heart disease. So again, another component. I put vitamin D in there. This is something interesting. So vitamin D comes from the sun. We are seeing associations, I said associations, not causes, of low vitamin D to increased COVID, people who get sicker when they have COVID. But then again, it might be obesity. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. It's something that's soluble in fat, not water. Think about what happens when we gain weight in the belly. We have a lot of fat. It sucks up the body's vitamin D. So a low vitamin D might also be an indicator of someone who is on their way towards diabetes and heart disease. So you look at it as another indicator. Treating it will make a difference. You know, if you take a vitamin D supplement, but you smoke and you're 30 pounds overweight, probably won't make a difference. But as a marker of are you on risk for heart disease, I think it's something to think about. And then I have two more in here, 10 and 10.5. Omega-3s. Now, I actually am not going to recommend taking an omega-3 supplement. This has been somewhat controversial. Omega-3s have healthy properties. Foods that are rich in omega-3s, specifically North Atlantic fatty fish, omega-3s stay liquids at cold temperatures. Think about that. So if you were a fish in the North Atlantic in 35-degree water, and you had, let's say, saturated fat in your blood, saturated fat's a solid at room temperatures, you know, your blood would freeze. So omega-3s stay liquids. It allows cold water fish to function. And they tend to have anti-inflammatory properties. The problem is most omega-3 supplements are not pure. So you're getting some omega-3 in there, but you're also getting a lot of other fats that you probably don't need in your diet. There are prescription level omega-3 preparations that have shown to have cardiovascular outcomes in high-risk people, like by taking the pill, you lower your risk of heart attacks and whatnot for high-risk people. But going back, I'm going to take omega-3 supplements. I would tell you eat foods that have a lot of omega-3s. I think is a better way to approach it. And I put in here, as my last point, a growing area of evidence, which is inflammatory diseases. Think of that pimple. Something inflames your body. Your arteries are getting inflamed. The inflammation is what leads towards the plaque and the blockage. So the inflammatory disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, gingivitis, the inflammation chronically in our gums when I was seeing might lead to vascular disease. Psoriasis, on the left you see an aorta of someone with an inflammatory disease. So if you have inflammatory disease or risks, be extra aggressive in cardiovascular prevention. A lot of the rheumatological associations now will take their patients with inflammatory disease and put them on statins and not just recognize the joint deformity or the inflamed tissue that's overtly evident, but also the cardiovascular risks. So I put that in there as a growing area of science, as you will. So a couple of final points in the interest of time, and I hope this was something that resonates with you folks. Heart disease, there's no quick fix. I have this argument all the time with our bypass surgeons and my partners who open up the arteries. I fixed the artery. No, you did nothing. You made the artery opening broader with your procedure, but the underlying disease is still there. It's still in the arteries. It's still going to cause blockages elsewhere. So we don't fix it with procedures. We fix it with lifestyle changes, medications where appropriate. We also know if it doesn't get better, if we don't do things to make it better, it's going to worsen. It's a chronic illness over decades. It doesn't start with a normal artery and you wake up the next morning with a blockage. It's progressive, so the earlier we find out about it, the more motivated we can be, but obviously the more we do to prevent it in the first place, the better it is. It's a slowly progressive disease, has a long asymptomatic course. So as we're better at defining who might have early atherosclerosis, coronary calcium scores, ultrasounds, it's not a death sentence. Don't take yourself to the emergency room because you get a test that says you might have early atherosclerosis, but you do have the opportunity to do something about it. And I think that's the take-home point. The good news is we can prevent heart disease. We can keep those arteries healthy. We can prevent them from blocking. Ideally, the goal is to die with a normal artery of something else at a ripe old age. If you die with a mildly atherosclerotic artery you didn't know about, I'm good with that too. But the treatments start with lifestyle changes and where needed, medications. I know how crazy this is. Again, as a preventive cardiologist, I'm involved in a lot of different areas of thought. And I put in here a joke. It says our menu is divided into 3 sections: cancer-causing foods, artery-clogging foods, and foods that are being boycotted for political and environmental reasons. It's what do we eat? How do we make ourselves healthy? And of course, even as Patricia mentioned, enjoy your Valentine's chocolates, have a glass of wine. We don't want to over obsess with it, but your general eating habits will improve, forgetting the political issues. But even obesity and the cardiovascular risk factors are also associated with cancer risk. So going back to the original premise, food in its most natural forms, it's a good rule of thumb to live by. Heart disease is now a problem. Don't wait. And I will thank you for your time and attention. And hopefully this wasn't too low-level information, but I'm certainly willing to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Dr. Fialco. Great summary. A lot of information packed in there. So it is Valentine's Day, and I want to start with my mom. She died at 93 and had a great heart. She credited her heart health to a nightly ritual of Pinot Noir and dark chocolate. Is there any truth to the resveratrol story?
So,
And that dark chocolate is also good for the heart?
so I'm gonna answer that in 2 ways, and one is a higher level philosophical question because that's how I roll, and the other is then the specific. But when we think of this complex abnormality of our life, how much sleep we get, how much stress, inhalants on the highway from exhaust fumes, pollutants in the air, gender, all the things that get put in our body's blender and come out with heart disease, the thinking that I could take one magic berry or one piece of food or one pill and then completely correct it, it's what's called reductionist thinking, taking very complex systems and bringing them down to reducing it to a simple thing. So the short answer is, if you're a smoker who's 30 pounds overweight and you eat dark chocolate and you take a resveratrol tablet, which probably doesn't get absorbed, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference to help you. Having said that, there are many components in nature which seem to decrease atherosclerosis, improve insulin resistance, which is probably the harbinger of really a lot of this inflammation. Resveratrol, which comes from grapes and maybe in wine, may make a difference, but I wouldn't go seeking out resveratrol foods. Dark chocolate may have some vasodilating properties, various components, flavonoids and whatnot, which might help the body. Doesn't have a lot of sugar. I think that's the issue with dark chocolate. Milk chocolate really has no chocolate. It's sugar and cocoa butter. Dark chocolate, especially when it's 85%, doesn't have a lot of sugar. So if you enjoy it, that's fine. It won't make you unhealthy, so to speak. And I think that's where it comes from. So foods that won't make you unhealthy get turned into foods that are healthy, and that's not the same type of thing. Now, if you go back to this French paradox, which some of you may remember about 15, 20 years ago, it goes back towards the thinking. Remember I showed you 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we weren't obese. We weren't diabetic. And probably it has to do with a lot of bad information from the late 70s, where the thinking by some of the medical organizations in our government was that cholesterol and fat in the diet is bad for you, which quite frankly it's not, led to the food industry and all the marketing to say fat-free. Fat-free meant high sugar. Remember Snackwells, these cookies that had no fat in it, and they were just, sugar bombs. And it seems to be the increase in sugar in our diet over the last 40, 50 years, the decrease in fat that's triggering the obesity and the diabetes. So the French paradox of certain regions in the Mediterranean basin that eat a lot of cheese and they drink wine and they eat dark chocolate and they don't get heart disease, it's because they don't eat refined starches and sugars. They don't eat cookies and they don't eat a lot of white rice and whatnot. The breads are whole grains. So it's not really a paradox. The disease really triggers the refinement of our carbohydrates in the processed foods. They eat everything natural from the markets. So when you go back to these things, it is what you eat. We are what we eat. And dark chocolate's fine in regular areas. Red wine is fine. Like I said, if you're healthy and you want to stay healthy, it's great. If you want to bring your weight down, you might want to give it up for a couple of months, and when you achieve a normal weight, reintroduce them. But there's no magic pill, there's no magic fruit, there's no magic food, there's no magic substance. One last thing I'll share, and you see I can go on. There's a family of medications, GLP-1 inhibitors, which may be revolutionary. I don't want to rely on medications. They were actually developed for diabetics They actually make you full faster and have a couple of other benefits. And they're now being shown to be extremely safe and will be used for weight loss. Goes back to the original premise. You eat a lot of carbohydrates, you store them, it leads to inflammation. So it gives you certain abilities to not eat a lot of carbohydrates. You can do it naturally with medicines. But if we're talking about some substance that really may be a game changer, these family of medications do seem to be very promising. Again, it's unfortunate we have to rely on a medication and we can't teach our community about how to not need the medication. But in the interest of not being a purist and just wanting people to get healthier, these GLP-1 inhibitors are making many, like myself, very optimistic that we'll have more weapons against heart disease and obesity and diabetes.
So that relates, the issue of medication relates to a question that came in on the chat, and also relates this time to the history of my dad. Type 2 diabetic from the time he was very young. Starting at age 50, he had two, and ever since, multiple quadruple bypasses. He's been stented multiple times, and he takes a daily dose of statins. The good news is he's 91 and he's going strong. There's a question that came in on the chat where the individual is reluctant to take statins, even though their cholesterol level is high, under 300, but still high. Should people be reluctant to take statins? Is there a reason not to take them?
Statins are the most widely prescribed medication in mankind's history. There are more human beings on statins than any other medication ever. They're extremely safe. They've been around 40 years. They have profound benefit, and most people who take them probably don't need them. They're extremely widely overprescribed. Now, the reality is, if I tell you, Patricia, you've got a 5% chance of a heart attack over the next 10 years, which could be a reasonable number, which means you have a 95% chance of not having a heart attack. But I say by lowering the statin, by lowering the cholesterol in the arteries with a statin, we can decrease the 5%, and it's safe. You'll say, let me take the statin. The purist will say, well, you had a 95% chance of not having a heart attack. Why are you taking the statin? The reality is, well, if you're in the 5% and you have the heart attack, you don't really care about the other 95. So until we get better and we know who's going to have the heart attack and not, we use probabilities. So when people have a risk of a heart attack based on weight, gender, age, blood pressure, diabetes, all these things that's certainly high, we recommend statins. They're very safe. Now, let me pull it back a level. When we talk about prevention, we're talking about taking someone who's alive and well, sits in front of me in an office, and the question is there any evidence that I have something going on right now that can cause a problem in the future that's preventable, right? I can't prevent a meteor from crashing into anyone's bedroom tonight. We can't prevent a lot of cancers. We can find them early. Women get mammograms to detect breast cancer, not to prevent it. But we can prevent heart attacks and strokes. So the next question is, well, what's my risk of heart attack and stroke? And if it's at a certain level, you then say, how do I lower it? And statins are great ways to lower it. They keep the natural cholesterol in the body that inflames the arteries out of the arteries to decrease the inflammation. But if we have a better way of predicting someone's risk, let's use it. So the gentleman in the question talks about getting a scan which looked at actual atherosclerosis in the arteries, and to the levels of the scan, didn't find any. So if you make the argument that we look at your cholesterol level in the blood and a lot of other things to say, what's the chance of having atherosclerosis? But now you have a test that says, but you don't have atherosclerosis, then the logical next step will be, then I don't need to be on a statin. So we lower the cholesterol with statins, anticipating that the person has vascular disease. But if we now find they don't have vascular disease, you don't need the statin. So the level of information we have right now is for people from 40 to 75 years old who might get this calcium score, which is an early detector of vascular disease, and it's 0. It's not that their risk of a heart attack is 0. It's so small that statins won't benefit. Now, again, I'm going to give you another caveat because we're learning in this space rapidly, but we're still learning. I showed you that plaque, and people can have soft, mushy plaque and not calcific plaque. Calcific plaque is over many years, the plaque can calcify. So if you have a genetic, very high cholesterol level, even a 0 score or a scan that shows no plaque, you still may not be likely, soft plaque. So the medical organizations basically say it's the person's choice. So when I have someone with a cholesterol over 200 plus and the score is 0, I say, listen, here's the school of thought. If you want to go with, I'm pretty sure I lead a healthy lifestyle, I don't want to be on a statin, I think it's a perfectly reasonable decision. If you say I'd rather be over aggressive, is there a risk of statin? The answer is really no. I think that's a reasonable decision. So in the gentleman in the question, if your preference is not to take a statin and the score is 0, I think there's no medical information that would say you're wrong. If your score is 0 and you say, I don't really know yet, I think statins have been around a long time and they're protective, I'd like to take it, I think that's a good decision as well. But no doctor could come in and say, this is what the data shows. We don't have it based on the scores of 0. Your dad who's 91, fascinating. There's no data that says a 91-year-old benefits from a statin, even with a history of heart disease. But in Europe, in the last year, they did a study where they took older people off statins who were on them for many years, and they tended to do worse. They started to see a slight increase in cardiovascular disease. So in a healthy person who's got a good quality of life at 91, I would keep them on a statin. If they're very functionally, declined and, their quality of life's not great anyway, you might say, why put something else in their system? Point is, this becomes very, very individualized. When you go with your doctor, you make your decisions. What do I have? What are my risks? What's my perception of my disease? What's my interest in taking a medication or a lifestyle change? And that's the fun part of doing what I do. You customize and individualize the approach, taking all those things into account. And a lot of it is, as I said before, Patricia, it's probabilities. It's 5 out of 100 will have a heart attack in 5 years. Are you the 1 out of 20? We don't know, but we want to be as cautious as possible, which also goes back to lifestyle adjustments. Use your natural means of decreasing your risk. And where medications may be appropriate, use them, but obviously try to avoid being in a situation where medications are even an issue.
This is really helpful. I want to come back to male and female. We used to, when I was growing up, it was men who had heart attacks, and you
Sure.
hear about men having heart attacks. And now increasingly, and your graphs showed this, we're seeing an increase in everybody, but we're especially seeing a pronounced increase in heart attacks in women. Do we have an idea what to attribute this to?
So heart disease is the #1 killer of women. Women tend, so a couple of things. First thing, yes, you're going back to the trials in the 60s and 70s. Most of the people put in trials were men. Most of them were men of European descent. They weren't multi-ethnic like we have in our nation now. And a lot of them smoked. So some of the reasons that thought that men had heart disease more than women was higher prevalence of smoking, maybe more stress, maybe more out eating and drinking. We're not really sure, but it really was that women weren't really followed. We just didn't do studies looking at women, so it probably was happening more than we identified. That's changed over the last couple of decades. Women tend to get heart disease at a lower rate than men prior to menopause. Estrogen does seem to have a protective effect on women in vascular disease. Maybe it's other components. After menopause, women's rates of heart disease accelerate and catch up to men about 8 to 10 years after menopause. So heart disease is a disease of women. Smoking tends to eliminate the protection of estrogen. So smoking women of premenopausal age, very high rates of heart disease. So the reality is we should not have a bias in a person being a man or a woman. You want to address their cardiac risk factors across the board, and they are the same. Women may present a little differently than men in heart disease. Men tend to get the classic chest pressure. Women can feel fatigued. They can feel short of breath. Doesn't matter. Look at the risk factors. Calcium scores are valid in women. The statin efficacy data is positive in women. So I don't think of heart disease as a disease of men. I think of it as men and women. I'll be a little more attentive to younger men, though again, we do see some young women with heart disease as well. But I think that bias is falling out of favor in our society. It certainly should. If you're a woman and your doctor dismisses your symptoms and you think, well, if we're a man, I even say to women, I say, listen, it sounds weird, but if you're a man, I'd be doing this. I'm going to do this. And we pick up heart disease in women, quite honestly.
So I'm asking this question with obviously personal bias, but is there something for postmenopausal women that especially represents good prevention?
Similarly, so again, it goes back towards insulin resistance and carbohydrates in a lot of ways. Estrogen tends to make women more insulin sensitive. So I'll bring it back. Simple sugars and carbohydrates get absorbed by the body and they trigger insulin. And the reason is we don't want sugars in our blood. High levels of sugars can cause toxicity to our organs. Insulin gets the sugar out of your blood. By the way, where does it put it? It puts it into your belly fat. So fat in your belly came from dietary sugar. It's converted into storage fat. Dietary fat goes to your muscles for energy. So insulin is a hormone that takes the sugar in your body and your blood from your diet and gets rid of it, keeps it out of the arteries, keeps it out of your organs. Estrogen makes you insulin sensitive, which means a given amount of sugar, dark chocolate, will trigger a little bit of insulin, and then the insulin will get the sugar out of your blood. When you are menopausal, and steroids do this, it makes you insulin resistant. So the same amount of carbohydrate now produces a much higher insulin response. And the insulin drives the inflammation. So it does seem like women who are in the perimenopausal state, who decrease their simple carbohydrate intake, tend to maintain a normal weight and maintain a normal health. The weight gain that women see with menopause seems to be simple carbohydrate driven. So that's the main thing I think a woman can do as they get older, is decrease carbohydrate intake for every stage of their life. True for men too, but it happens a little bit earlier, having to do with testosterone. As far as other things, stay active. Obviously, bone density is important for being physically active to prevent osteoporosis. Not smoking remains extremely important, getting enough sleep. So all the other things are there. Now, interestingly, and many of you knew that years ago, we would prescribe estrogen for women at menopause to prevent heart disease. And then large study was done that shows it probably wasn't effective. The reality is it probably is effective. There's some components with cancer and progesterone, and it was subsets of women, smokers who maybe didn't do well. And it became so complicated that the medical organization just threw their hands up and said, we don't know. So we're not going to recognize hormonal replacement in women specifically for heart disease prevention. It may happen again. It becomes the personal choice. And hopefully every woman in a perimenopausal state will speak to their primary care doctor or their gynecologist and have that conversation regarding what they're looking for, what they want out of estrogen replacement. But the jury's really not set regarding was there a cardiovascular benefit in specific subsets of women.
So I want to bring this now to the population that we serve, which are elderly seniors. And whether or not prevention, as you're describing it, is still worthwhile or guarded. We have many residents in their 90s who love chicken fat or who love fried chicken.
Knock themselves out.
What do you tell seniors, elderly seniors, about diet? And related to that, BMI. We spend a lot of time trying to encourage elderly seniors to gain weight. And look at BMI a little bit differently than when they're vastly younger.
So that speaks towards a couple of my comments, which I know you picked up on. Every recommendation should be individualized, customized to the person and their status, including what they're looking for in life. There's no one diet for everyone. The highest risk population for heart disease is the older population. So going back to the arguments, well, it's 75, stop a statin. Those are the ones who kind of need it the most if they're at high risk. Dietary components, the reality is, how many people say, I want to enjoy this at this stage of my life? And the reality is, it's okay. I mean, how much are they going to really change with an unhealthy meal here and there? I think it's the chronicity of the refined processed foods that become the issue. So going back to the original premise, if someone's diabetic and out of control and their kidney function's diminishing and they got bad circulation, you want to be aggressive with them so they don't lose their legs, so don't go on dialysis, so don't go blind. But if someone's numbers are not great and their quality of life is good, and they're 90, you could be a little bit more liberal with what you're trying to accomplish. Anything they're doing at 90 is going to provide benefit or risk 7, 8, 10 years down the road. And again, we have people, my mom's going to be 95, lives alone, God bless and whatnot. But the timelines of the decisions you're making are a little bit shortened. So I think you want to customize. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to beat them up. You don't want to take people who are at the later stages of their life and they've accomplished a lot and they're really at the time when you don't want to burden them with unnecessary thoughts, and we make them anxious. We make them worried about things that enjoy it. Don't worry about it. Nothing bad's going to happen. And partly it's because we're worried. We're worried about ourselves, so we portray that in other people as well. Again, so it's a little bit of a psychological exercise, but I would go back towards not saying like I'm going to eat a piece of bacon, so I'm going to die early. Not going back towards, I'm going to take a puff. Well, I won't say about puff a cigarette. I can't justify that under any circumstances. But you follow what I'm saying? It's all these large systems, complex things that happen in our body, and we don't want to fine tune on one specific thing at the expense of making people crazy. other than smoking. And listen, I have 90-year-old smokers in my practice. Now, if I've got a room full of 60-year-old smoking men, I can't tell them you're all going to die of lung cancer or heart disease. There will be people who slip through. I'll say you're more likely than if you didn't smoke. But going back, Patricia, it's all probabilities. But the outlier, the person who's 90 years old and still smoking, should not tell a 60-year-old, go ahead and keep smoking because you're going to be fine, because that's not where the statistics will bear out.
Well, Dr. Fialko, I cannot thank you enough. I could listen to you for another several hours. Notwithstanding the fact that you're not
And I could talk for another several hours. So.
the dark chocolate and Pinot Noir. I'd like to, if you have a question in the chat and it wasn't answered, we'll try to get it answered for you. Dr. Fialko is still answering a few questions.
I'll answer for
But
you.
to be respectful of his time and our time, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Think Heart Healthy, it's Heart Healthy Month, and again, have a wonderful Valentine's Day. With that, I turn it back to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Dr. Fialko, for those incredible insights. We will be sure to keep these points about our health in mind as we continue to enhance our Belmont communities. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Just showing up and being here today helps us grow as a community, and that's what Belmont is really about. Partnerships like the one we have with Baptist Health in Coral Gables illustrates that reach into the community so clearly. When our founder and CEO, Patricia Will, set out to begin building Belmont Village, she did it with the purpose of creating an environment focused on total wellness and continued education, whether it be about memory care, physical fitness, or talks like the one we've just heard today about heart health. It's about bringing people together in the spirit of longevity and wellness. Our unique, first of its kind partnership with Baptist Health here in Coral Gables helps us do just that. And that's the strength of what Belmont has to offer, a community built for life. From the beginning, the company acknowledged the unique care needs of residents by building a robust health and wellness model that includes around-the-clock licensed nurses, medication and diabetes management, and professional therapy services. Today, Belmont Village Senior Living has more than 31 locations across the country and in Mexico City, offering independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Our attention to evolving resident needs guided the company in the development of its memory care, including its unique approach to brain fitness and our groundbreaking Circle of Friends program for mild cognitive impairment. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about a Belmont Village community near you, please reach out to our family advisor, Susan Berger. Her contact information is on the screen behind me, and if you want to reach her directly, you can call her at 424-232-0701. I hope you guys all have a wonderful Valentine's Day and enjoy the rest of your day.